Well, happy Easter. Very glad that you are here to worship with us at St. Michael. Easter is a very special day because here at St. Michael, we remember the promise that God has made, the promise fulfilled in the resurrection on Easter. That great promise that God makes to us is that what we see is not all there is. What we see around us in this world, that's not all there is. That actually, what God does is gives us more than what we see, what we hear, what we can sense ourselves. God's promise is that beyond everything that we see, there is something more, an even greater purpose. And we see this all throughout the Bible. The Bible stories show us time and time again that humanity, we are limited. We can't ever really see exactly what God has in store. We cannot understand God's purposes fully. And so we stumble along like we're in the darkness. And then time and time again, what God does is uses people that the world thinks do not have any real value in order to fulfill his purposes. From people like Moses to David, and then of course Mary to Peter, these are people that the world would not have thought any value. And yet God sees deep in their soul, sees what is possible, sees purpose, and then works his great promise through people just like that. God even shows in the resurrection that death itself is not what we think it is, that death itself is even defeated because of Jesus' resurrection. Why do you look for the living among the dead? That's the question that the women get when they go to anoint Jesus' body at the tomb. Why do you look for the living among the dead? That is essentially the fundamental question that we are asked today. As we go about living our life, it's pretty easy to feel good about God when things are going our way. When we get the stuff we want, when we are successful, when we achieve, when we hit all those highs, yeah, sure, thanks God, I am blessed. That's great. When things don't go our way, when they don't work out, when we don't get what we want, and especially when tragedy strikes, that's when we can begin to flip the script on God and begin to wonder why God would do that to us. Why God wouldn't actually treat us the way that we had hoped to be treated, why bad things happen. Far too often, that kind of line of reasoning, that understanding of the world is simply our limited way of seeing what God is doing. When those bad things happen, I hope the question pops into our minds, why do you look for the living among the dead? Why indeed? Do we often only see what the world tells us to see rather than what God has shown us again and again? Why is it that we only hear what the world wants us to hear instead of hearing God's voice, speaking to us, urging us, lifting us up, even when things don't go right? Today is Easter Sunday when that promise is fulfilled, and today is the day we get reminded of what I hope we probably already knew at some point, but perhaps we have forgotten. Reminded that God is present in each one of us, present through our relationships. And again, of course, we are called to follow Jesus, follow the one that defeated death, to be a disciple of Jesus. And that discipleship, that commitment, that investment, that's what actually changes us and transforms us day by day, step by step. And that transformation, it's not magic. It's not sensational. We don't fall out. We just simply, every day, have the chance to make another choice of faith, to look to the cross, to look to the empty grave, and to find hope. Discipleship is fundamentally our choice. And God hopes that we make that choice today. God hopes that we actually commit ourselves new today. Because that Christian way of life, that's actually what we're made for. That's the deepest longing of our soul. It is what we need most. Now that choice, that's something that happens in very complicated, high-level theological ways sometimes. But most of the time, it happens in very small, everyday, mundane ways. This idea of choice got me thinking about an interview that I heard a few weeks ago. A journalist who is used to observing humans and kind of writing about what people do, He himself was rushing and through traffic, and he had to make a U-turn, and he clipped the median a little too hard, and he tore the sidewalls of both of his tires, immediately going flat. And thankfully, he said, he saw just down the road a tire store. And so he limped his poor, sad car all the way to the tire store, and he gave thanks a little bit because at least there was a tire store there. And so he goes into the waiting room, and he sits down in between two women, and he described these women as looking very similar to each other. Like he probably couldn't have told them apart in a lineup. Same basic hairdo, same basic outfit, all of that sort of stuff. But one of the women was talking loudly on her phone. She was apparently mad because a waiter had gotten her order wrong at lunch twice, and she was very certain he had done it on purpose. And so she was very mad, and she asked to talk to the manager, and the manager came over, and she wanted that waiter fired, and the manager was having nothing of it, which made her even angrier. And so now she was going to leave a scathing review online. And she was even thinking about putting up posters on the walls and the telephone poles all around the restaurant to make sure nobody went there again. And she ended her call really angrily, and she huffed back in her chair. And not 15 seconds later, the other woman leaned over to him and said, "You know, I had the most wonderful experience at a restaurant this morning. I was sitting there enjoying my coffee, looking out the window, and I saw a lovely young lady walking a big, beautiful dog down the street. And she was walking toward the intersection, and she saw an elderly man who was there waiting to cross the street, but when the crosswalk sign came on, he didn't really want to cross. He seemed a little scared to take the street all by himself, and so she walked up, had a little moment, touched the crosswalk button again, and when it came on a second time, she gently took the man by the arm and walked him across the street. All the while, the big dog was guarding them just to make sure that the cars did not get any wise ideas. And when they got over to the other side of the street, they had a little conversation. She pointed a little bit down the street, and then the man looked a little confused, and so she took him by the arm once more, and they walked off down the street together. Isn't that wonderful? And the man said, he said very loudly in response, "Yes, that is wonderful." And it got me thinking, who would you rather spend the day with? Number one or number two? I think the choice is quite easy. Because on the one hand, we have a person who is seeing the world through a negative lens, like a victim, and then spewing that negativity all over everyone else, like innocent bystanders. And on the other hand, you have a person who sees the beauty in the world, the goodness, people actually caring for each other when they don't have to. It is not a hard choice to make. In that way, I kind of think discipleship is not a hard choice to make. What Jesus offers us is this hopeful way of being that actually meets our needs deep down. The resistance we have is because the world has taught us that we're supposed to want and succeed and achieve and accumulate and define ourselves by all of that stuff. But actually, we know deep down that those things, they don't matter as much as goodness and beauty and love. The choice is ours. The choice of how to actually take steps day by day to change and transform us from the inside out. That choice is ours, and we are made for this. Last Sunday was Palm Sunday. It's a big day, it's a fun day, and we always like the big show of Palm Sunday, but we showed up here only to find out that the sound system was out. And it freaked us out a little bit, but we all kind of, girded our loins, and we looked at each other and we said, we just have to project really well. And so we did that. We made it work. It was all just fine. But by the time we got up to the altar and we were doing the communion prayers, a different surprising thing happened. Because typically we're up there behind the altar and we are amplified into the room, and so at least half the sound in the room is our voices being amplified, but not last Sunday, because there was no amplification. And by the time we got to the place in our communion prayer where we say the Lord's Prayer together, everyone said that prayer with gusto, but what surprised me was that floating on top of all of the adult voices were these tiny voices of children saying the Lord's Prayer because we'd gotten to the place in the service they knew cold. And they were going to show off and make sure everyone knew they knew that prayer. And it made me stop. Because here are these beautiful voices of children who know this prayer, and they are praying confidently, and it was beautiful. See, we're made for this. We are born for this. God created you and me to actually follow the grace and love of Jesus. On this Easter Sunday, I hope deeply that you feel that call and you feel that nudge and that you want to respond in a new way this year. Perhaps even for the first time, respond with that hope that allows God, the Spirit, to actually change who you are and who you are becoming. This is a gift for us and something that can change us for the good forever. Say yes to this gift. Make small choices, starting now. And I promise, God promises, that you will be changed for good. Alleluia. Christ is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. Alleluia. Happy Easter. Amen.